Welcome. Welcome to the third episode of the Right to Clean Water. On this episode, we're excited to speak with a couple experts on water quality and water contamination, especially in Orange County. On the phone also, we have two of our directors from the Florida Rights of Nature Network. We have Joe Benasia, and he is down in Lee County. And we also have David Moritz, who's up in Alachua County. So we have 6 directors around the state, plus 1 at-large director. And this initiative, the Right to Clean Water, is the first time that this kind of initiative has gone on a countywide ballot anywhere in the country. So we're very excited about this, and we're a little over a month away from knowing what the election results are. We hope that this broadcast will teach you what is going on with our water, and you'll become more educated and a better voter for it. First, I'd like to introduce Gabrielle Milch. She is the St. Johns River waterkeeper for the Middle Basin. Say hi, Gabby.
Hi, and thanks for inviting me here today. It'll be good to talk with y'all.
Okay, we're going to be hearing more from Gabby in a second. And then we also have Sharon Bramlett, who's an environmental consultant here in Orange County.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you both here. So let's start off with you, Gabrielle. Tell us a little bit about water quality in Orange County and specifically in the middle basin of the St. Johns River.
Okay, so the water quality in our surface waters, our lakes, rivers, streams, and some canals have been having problems with nitrogen and phosphorus and a lot of the runoff that comes from non-point sources that you can't point at. Things like rubber from your tires, cadmium from your brakes, oil, gas, those kinds of things all get on the hard surfaces and then wash off during the stormwater runoff and go into our rivers, lakes, streams, sometimes through a stormwater pond and sometimes just direct connect. So that can be pretty bad. And the worst pollution too is just plain old soil and dirt just getting in the water. That can be very unhealthy too.
Okay. Is there anything that's going on in the Middle Basin regarding the St. Johns River that is especially problematic when it comes to things like blue-green algae?
Yeah, we have a big problem with raw sewage that gets discharged occasionally into the rivers. We have some problems with the raw sewage, and that has to do with the amoeba. It has to do with the microorganisms and some of the medicines and things we take. And the blue-green algae are especially excited about the high phosphorus and nutrient issues in the waterways. So that feeds the algae. Not good.
And what can we do about that? Is that something that we're helpless in controlling, or is there something we can do about that?
Well, with the raw sewage and the treated wastewater, we can treat those waters to higher levels, of course, and invest in our infrastructure and get our utilities, whether they're private or government utilities, to keep up with it and do the right maintenance to them and have inspections more than once every 6 years. Maybe once a year would be a good idea, like they used to.
Recently, I guess it was last year, there was an incident where Utilities Inc. dumped 1.2 million gallons of untreated wastewater or improperly treated wastewater into one of the streams that they're adjacent to, and that I think that all of that wound up in the Wekiva River. I understand that there was a fine of about, I think, $25,000, and then that was it.
Yeah, and they had to modify their permit and fix the reason why that occurred. But the sad thing about that was that actually Wekiva Springs State Park, the swimming spring, was actually closed for several days because of the high fecal coliform levels. It was it was above 100, and that's unsafe for people.
Yeah, indeed it is. Sharon, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you know about groundwater contamination in Orange County?
Okay, for about 3 decades, I've worked as an environmental consultant in the Florida area and especially Orange County. And I've learned from very personal experience how widespread contamination is in our environment and also Orange County. And I've learned this from field testing of air, soil, and water. And that's proved to me how dangerous chemicals of concern have impacted our aquifers, which provide 90% of our drinking water. Now, this impacts not only public health, it impacts the economy, tourism, and environmental health.
Yeah, and there was just a map up. Let's bring it up again, Dean. Okay, here is a map. Could you describe what we're looking at, Sharon?
This map is from the FDEP Map Direct, which is public information. And this shows the areas where facilities have reported a discharge, are cleaning up a discharge, and that can be a wide variety of facilities, including petroleum, dry cleaning, Superfund, waste cleanup. There are many different types of facilities that are indicated on that map. And if you'll notice on the map, the sites are so dense that it's very difficult in some areas to see the roads in Orange County.
Yeah, it looks like mostly, let's see, the densest part looks to be the city of Orlando,
Yes.
somewhere around there. And then as you go up I-4, there's a cluster through Winter Park and Maitland and Eatonville. And then there's also clusters south of Lake Apopka and rimming Lake Apopka to the north, also the city of Apopka. So what happens? Let's say there's a spill or gasoline leaking out of underground tanks. Where does that go?
Generally, it goes first into the soil, and then depending on the geology and the amount of release, it can easily go into the groundwater. And from there, it migrates based on the elevation, generally speaking. So sometimes the contamination based on the soil types can stay on site, and sometimes based on the soil types and the elevation and other things like utility troughs, it can also easily migrate off-site.
Okay, so if you have a spill like that and it rains about 54 inches of rain a year in Florida on average, and you have that spill, the rain picks up that chemical. Where does that chemical go?
The chemical generally goes in the direction of the groundwater flow, and it expands, and some of the chemicals sink down a little bit lower depending on the chemical, and some chemicals float more at the surface. For example, PCE, which is very common, or what's called PERC, is deeper than water. So it will sink, and it will sink to such a clay layer. Where gasoline, most of the compounds, unless it's very, very old spill, will stay more closer to the surface. And they will vary in the length of where they go to and the conduit that they're going through. So I've seen, for example, PCE contamination travel 1/4 mile.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have in this area southwest of the Wakaiwa Springs and Rock Springs, what's called the spring shed. And in the spring shed, the water that falls on the ground filters down through the ground into the superficial aquifer, and then can get into the upper Floridan aquifer. And that's where we all, or most of us in this county, drink out of. The upper Floridan aquifer is where most of our municipal wells are sunk into, where our private wells are sunk into. So if these chemical spills, was it PCEs?
PCE, some people call it PERC.
PERC, and that's heavy and it sinks. And so if you're if the aquifer is vulnerable in that area, like it is in West Orange County, which is, that's one of the things about Orange County. You have different geologies. There's a confining layer for the most part on the east side of Orange County, like a clay plate. But in West Orange County, there's very little, or that clay plate is broken up. So the chemicals filter down more on the west side of Orange County and get into the water. Is that right?
Yes, they can more easily get into the groundwater, including the springs, surface water, lakes, and also into drinking water, because it's going to vary quite a bit. So with the density of the soil, the type of soil, how quickly it moves, and on average, for example, petroleum contaminants can move roughly 400 to 600 feet, I'd say on average. Now, sometimes a lot more, whereas PCE can move significantly more. And if it gets into the lower aquifer, it can make its way down into the source of our springs, which is what happens when it rains, for example, on the ridge. It all comes down and into the springs.
When you say the ridge, what do you?
Well, the high point, such as Claremont,
Okay.
that area is higher. So the water tends to come from there. And since the Lake Apopka is at a higher elevation, it also comes from there. And gradually, some people have said 100 years, some people have said a couple hundred years, it will get into the springs. And there are 5 Superfund sites in Orange County. One is in Zellwood. Okay. So that's west. So now it's been looked at, remediated, and monitored for decades. So that's just one example of how these contaminants can gradually make it into our watershed, have the springs and the river.
Yeah.
And wells.
And when you talk about the travel time of water through the Wakaiwa Spring Shed, this is a question that has come up over and over again: is how long does that water take? There are people who say 100 years, and there are hydrogeologists that say it may be 18 months. It all depends really on. Because the aquifer is like a limestone piece of Swiss cheese. It's has cracks and crevices and conduits. So if you get a pollution source on top of a conduit, for instance, and that the water is rushing through that conduit and coming out in the springs, it could be much faster. Whereas it could, in some portions, it may just sit there for a long time.
Correct.
Right?
That is correct.
Yeah. What would you say, Gabby, is, when you deal with the St. Johns River, you're dealing with a lot of surface waters. There are sites where they take what they call them biosolids. Everything that in the having to do with water has got nice nomenclature, right? Biosolids for you at home are when you have a wastewater treatment facility, uh, they take the solids, what they can't get the water out of, they have the solids, and oftentimes it gets trucked to land and spread on that land. Is that right, Gabby?
Yeah, the land application of the biosolids is a common practice for most wastewater treatment plants. In fact, I think some of them turn it into a type of a fertilizer that can be used over time. But even in our headwaters of the St. Johns River, we've had some drinking water. One of the places where there's surface water that people use for their drinking water system, they've been spreading that on the some of the adjacent farm fields, and with rainfall and all of that, it just runs into the St. Johns River. And also sometimes the biosolids, of course, has other things besides the nutrients. It has all of the medicines that we take. It has some of the other pesticides and fertilizers and things that get into the surface waters as well. So biosolids rulemaking, I think, is going on right now in the state of Florida, and we're trying to get more stricter rules and a better pollution control on that, so they won't be doing some of the same practices that we're doing now.
Well, let me ask you both this question, because I get this one also. Once a year, we get a paper that says your water source, your municipal water source has been tested, and there's 6 or 8 different chemicals on that, and it gives you a range, and it says, oh, it's at 0.06, and you're good because the maximum is 1.0. So when you get that and it says you're all good, are they testing all the chemicals that are in the groundwater? I see you shaking your head, Sharon.
Not typically.
No.
Typically.
What don't they test for?
Well, there are many, many chemicals there. I mean, literally, there are probably over 1,000 chemicals that go into the soil and groundwater. They don't test for all of those because it would be very expensive. So they test for indicator chemicals, and then they make a decision, do they want to test again? I've seen those reports before, and some of them have showed, even in the Floridan aquifer, they have detected, for example, gasoline constituents, although at a very, very low, level.
Well, I mean, how much gasoline is safe to drink?
I would say almost none. I mean, gasoline contains benzene, and it's a known carcinogen.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 10-gallon container of gasoline can contaminate 12 million gallons of water.
So if you have let's say you have an old underground gas tank in an old, convenience store, and over time, because that's not something that they replace on a, weekly or monthly basis, over time it rusts out, or connections become loose or what have you, and it starts leaching into the aquifer. You're saying 1 10-gallon container can contaminate how many?
12 million
12 million
gallons of water.
And do we know how much gasoline is getting into our water?
Well, that's a very good question. Currently on the list, there's over 2,200 petroleum discharge sites in Orange County. Okay.
Could you repeat that?
Okay, they're currently right now, and that could change. There are over 2,200 petroleum discharge sites in Orange County. In the state of Florida, there are almost 38,000 petroleum discharge sites.
Mm-hmm. So
varying amount.
Now, how do you define what a discharge site is? What is that?
A discharge site, based on the current regulations, if there is a discharge, you're obligated to report it. And once they report it, then eventually it becomes assessed. Okay, so that the the depth, the cube of it, how big it is, gets investigated. And then once it's investigated, they decide on a cleanup program. And there's many different cleanup programs for petroleum. So the interesting thing is about that is also it's based on the available funds. Unless there's a responsible party that's not in any of the cleanup programs or is not registered, okay? Because there are a lot of old gas stations, for example, or a lot of old facilities where they don't even know yet. They haven't identified the contamination because it hasn't been investigated. And they're throughout Orange County and they're throughout the state.
So this is, one of the, I would say, issues with Florida. We have so many people now. We have 21.5 million people. Orange County has 1.4 million people. Plus we get up to, over 70 million tourists in Orange County a year. And a lot of them are driving, right? So in this county, we have people going to work. We have tourists coming in, or driving around town, or going to the theme parks, or what have you. So there's an awful lot of gasoline consumed in Orange County. Therefore, we have to have a lot of gas stations.
Right.
And of those gas stations, some are registered. Is that right? Some are registered and some are not.
I'd say maybe the majority are registered. However, there's quite a big number that are not.
And you've already enumerated for us just 10 gallons of gasoline can contaminate millions of gallons. And if you're also, we're talking a lot about gasoline, but that's just one.
That's just one.
That's just one. Also, we have on the west side, especially, a lot of the old orange groves. And can you tell us, Gabby, can you tell us something about what could leach into the soil from those old orange groves?
Well, the old orange groves, the best management practices that a lot of the citrus farmers used was to use liquid fertilizers, and also they would use spray pesticides and fumigation and fungicides to help the trees and plants prosper and grow lots of. So that some of that stuff degrades over time, and some of the more toxic chemicals and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides can stay in the land and don't, change form, or so there's a lot of pollutant potential out there. I know I was out in West Orange County once upon a time and went out to see Lake Apopka, and I know that there was a toxic site out there, Tower Chemical or something it's called, and that was a DDT manufacturing plant, and they actually had put a nursery on top of it, and they were using the soil from the nursery, filling the pots and things and sending it out. So dilution was the solution in that instance, but that hasn't occurred. That was like 15 years ago, so that was a while ago.
And isn't that still the EPA?
Yes, it is.
Superfund site.
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled upon that. That's out on the way to Claremont, right?
Right.
It's just south of Montverde.
South of Apopka, Lake Apopka.
South of Lake Apopka.
By the spring there, by the spring that,
You're right.
yeah,
And
Gordiac
there's
spring.
a sinkhole in the area.
Yeah.
I've got a question for both of you, because I want you to put on your thinking caps and imagine if back in the 40s and 50s, if Orange County had the right to clean water, if it had a charter amendment that said that individuals could be legally capable of trying to stop pollution instead of handing it off to our regulatory system. Where do you think Lake Apopka would be?
Lake Apopka is interesting. It's the fourth largest lake in the state, and it's used to be the #1 bass fishing area. And of course, we've lost a lot of that. And if rights to clean water had been voted on back then, I think that it could still be, a bass fishing lake. And some of the pollution that's happened there with the spraying from airplanes that they do aerial spraying on some of those farm fields and things has lasting effects. And I, wish they hadn't been able to use some of those chemicals. I mean, we outlawed DDT in the US, but we sprayed an awful lot of it before we did that.
Mm-hmm.
And that one lasts a long time, right?
Oh, definitely. That's a good point.
Now, if Sharon, let's stick with Lake Apopka for a second. If Lake Apopka had been preserved in the state it was in the 40s, when Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable used to come down here and go bass fishing, and you had all those fish camps around Lake Apopka, would you say that would be a positive effect on our economy?
It would be a huge positive effect on our economy, as more people would be comfortable fishing, swimming, skiing, and it would increase tourism, and people wouldn't question whether or not they could even eat the fish. So, that's part of building community, the right to clean water. That builds community.
Right. So, if it was, let's say it was clean and people were coming here from around the country or around the world, and they were spending money on hotels and eating in restaurants and buying the services of a fishing guide and doing all those things, you're saying it would have been a net positive. So what we have now, which is a lake that's been essentially killed by pollution, is that costing us money? Is pollution costing us money?
You want to?
No, go for it.
Absolutely. For example, the cost of petroleum discharge and PCE or PERC cleanup typically ranges from about $100,000 to over $500,000 each discharge. Okay. Now those are just those two compounds. Okay. That doesn't include diesel, waste oil, etc. So the cost is extremely high. And for example, there's over 1,300 Superfund sites in the US, 5 in Orange County, and the ones that are on the national priority list are being cleaned up first. So the cost of cleaning up those national priority list sites is in the billions of dollars. Not only that, it takes 2 to 27 years. So it takes a lot of time for those sites to be cleaned up. And imagine the personal worker exposure also involved in that assessment and cleanup.
Yeah, David has a question. David, can we go to David? Can you hear us, David?
Yes, I hear you. My question is about PFOSs and PFOAs. Are those found anywhere around the county? I know that there's usually where there's a military base, there you find it, but it also can be from industrial releases of it. And the problem, of course, is that this stuff never, ever, ever breaks down, and it builds up in fish many times higher than it does in the water that the fish live in typically. And the recommended maximum level for this stuff is something like 1 part per trillion in a given day. Of course, most areas allow much more than that, and some places have tens of thousands per trillion parts of PFOSs or PFOAs in either the ground or in the water.
Good point.
Would you like to answer that one, Sharon?
Well, I can't point to a specific one here in Orange County. However, there are some that are very obvious and have gotten a lot of press in Brevard County. And where we can expect to find them is processors and manufacturers of fire retardants, for example, and how they use that. So, as you said, We know that they are around military bases. So that's very common. And it's, like you said, sir, it is very consistent and it hangs out forever.
Now, how about things like Baldwin Park, where used to be the Naval Training Center? The military, Gabby, what's the military track record for cleaning up and being good stewards of the land when it comes to contamination?
Well, my hope is that they would be really good, but I read about other things that they may not be as good as we had hoped, and the cost a lot of times is very prohibitive. And if there's not specific rules or laws to make them do these things, I don't think it's a very good track record.
Yeah, and it's not to cast dispersion on the military, members of the military.
Mm-mm.
And in a lot of cases, they have been the recipients of bad management decisions on exposing them to their health. Joe, you had a question?
Yes, Chuck. Actually, I have a couple of questions. Down here in Southwest Florida, we have some of the same issues, especially around fecal bacteria contamination. And we are at times concerned that our health officials, our government, are not doing an adequate job of informing us when there are concerns with particular waterways. I was wondering what you might have to say about that situation up in Orange County, if there is one. And also down here, you probably know we've been hit hard with blue-green algae blooms, and there was great concern with cyanobacteria causing neurological diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Can you speak to that a little bit, if that's an issue up in Orange County?
Gabby?
Well, I know that this year we had some signs put out by the health department. There was some cooperation about, putting signs out to allow fishermen and women that put their boats in at boat ramps and things. I know that in Orange County, we have some toxic blue-green algae sites. I did hear a story about one retention pond that had some blue-green algae in it, and they had used it for irrigation, and the people who were around that area at that time did get sick from it. So, but there's no health standard for it right yet. The United States hasn't made a health standard for it. Do you know about that?
I'm not aware of it.
Joe is down in Fort Myers, and Fort Myers got hit really hard back in 2018 with cyanobacteria because of the discharge from Lake Okeechobee. Joe, tell us something about what happened to the economy with that pollution that came in from Okeechobee.
Well, the vast majority of our charter boats went unchartered. A lot of rooms and motels were not occupied. Bars saw significantly less patronage, as did our restaurants. We took a huge hit down here, and we have concerns that it impacted our reputation as a vacation destination. We've had a good year so far this year. Things have rebounded, but we're kind of always looking over our shoulder. Lako starts releasing water again, then we've got big concerns, health-wise and to our economy.
Yeah, well, and the few people that I talk to that express reservations about voting for this charter amendment, they say, well, what's this going to do to the taxpayers? What's this going to do to the taxpayers? And to me, let's look at the other side. What is it going to do to the taxpayers if we don't clean up our waterways? Joe was talking just now about the hit that it took the reputation of South Florida, of Lee County, etc. So if tourists stop coming to Orlando, Orange County, you know, a lot of that sales tax is generated, and it helps run our state. And that's the main reason why we don't have a state income tax. So if the tourists stop coming because our waters are so foul that they're afraid to bring their kids here, that they might get sick, then I think we're standing a good probability of having to go to a state income tax that would, you know, if you're worried about taxpayers, then you really need to be worried about tourists deciding not to come to Florida anymore. I mean, you know, we went through this in 2018 with the guacamole algae and you know, massive fish kills and marine mammal die-offs. That is a difficult thing to come back from a marketing standpoint, to get people to travel to Florida. So, you know, if this passes and the people around the world see that we are leaders in turning Florida into the clean water state, that we're actively trying to clean things up, I think they'd be more inclined to come here, right? And more inclined bringing more of their dollars to Central Florida and keeping our people employed here. So, you know, I don't want to seem mercenary about this, but look, clean water is affecting our economy. You know, as Joe said, what happened in 2018, they had something like a 40% reduction in all across the board in lodging. So all the people who owned hotels or whatever, you know, they lost 40% of their gross income. And that's just an incredible loss to the area. Well, I don't want to pontificate there, but this whole idea about, oh, what if this passes? What about the taxpayers? I'm saying, if it doesn't pass, what about the taxpayers, right? What about the people who are employed at Disney, right? Disney just laid off 28,000 people. You know, if we keep showing aside to the rest of the world that our waters are not clean, that is going to be a tremendous impact to our economy here and to the taxpayers. Joe, you had another question.
It wasn't a question, it's just that your remarks reminded me that I read somewhere, I believe it's on the Florida Chamber of Commerce website, that every 5 visitors to Florida generates 1 job.
Yeah, well, we're seeing what happens when you don't have visitors right now. There's so many people out there in Orange County and around the state who are have been furloughed, laid off. You know, we went through this water pollution problem, and now we're going through the effects of COVID. You know, here's an idea. Why don't we start trying to clean it up? Why don't we start trying to contain COVID? Let's start to contain pollution. And, you know, I'm willing to put money on it that our economy will recover much faster if we start paying attention to these things than if we put on blinders and say, you know, they don't exist. David, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking that every year there's a lot of water that comes down from farms and agriculture along the Mississippi, and it comes down, and of course, opens into the Gulf. And there's about an 8,500 square mile section of the Gulf, which is a dead zone, which is, starts right around just offshore outside where the Mississippi is. And that the same is true, basically everywhere in Florida we go where there's evidence of blue-green algae, because what happens is the blue-green algae dies. Of course, it needs nitrogen and phosphorus to grow, and it gets those from the stuff we put, the nutrients we put on the fertilizer we put on our farms to make our food grow. And yeah, we've got to have food, but then we don't watch what happens to it, when it leaves the farm and it gets into the water, and then it increases the growth of the blue-green algae, and then the blue-green algae dies, and the bacteria that break down the blue-green algae then use up all the oxygen in the water in that chemical reaction. And so then there's no oxygen in the water for the fish, and they die, and then we get fish kills, and we just have, that's where we were getting all these fish kills on the ocean, because, all that water that's being discharged out in the ocean. It's just one thing after another, and it just adds up, and we're not paying attention to the fine details of, what happens at each stage in the food chain. And yeah, we need to do something about pollution, because if we don't, it's going to get worse. Right now, we're losing around the world, and around, everywhere around the world, our estuaries, okay, and not just the estuaries. We're losing all the life that's in them, and the estuaries are, of course, where a lot of the small, marine creatures spawn, and where they, have their first couple of years, because usually there's fresh water that's released into the ocean water right at right where the state line ends, or right where the land ends, and the fresh water that enters, lowers the amount of salt that's in the water, and that makes it easier for these creatures to survive, the first few months of their lives. So that's why it's the great place for them to start. So we're killing off the oceans in essence by not watching the amount of pollution that we push into the ocean. We think we can just dump all of our waste, whether it's coming from septic and sewer, or whether it's coming from a runoff from agriculture, or from our own, lawns and cities, into the ocean, and that's just not true.
Yeah, and we're going to start to wrap it up now, and I do want to say that what we're doing here in Orange County with the Right to Clean Water, with this charter amendment, is a first step towards aggressively going after pollution sources and stopping pollution at the source. A lot of the pollution that's been allowed through regulation gets into the water, and they come to us and say, okay, now us taxpayers have to pay to clean up the water that's so nasty coming out of Lake Okeechobee. Well, wait a minute. What if the people who were putting the pollution stopped doing that, or filtered that water before it got discharged into our rivers and streams and lakes? Well, there's a concept, and that would be much less costly to the taxpayers. So, this is a very positive effort that's going on here in Orange County. I know David is working on putting forth something like this in Alachua County, and Joe is working on putting a right to clean water in different municipalities in Lee County and across the state. We have groups, looking at things like Biscayne Bay. David was talking about the lack of oxygen and the problems with the nutrients causing that, and they just have massive fish kills down there. So here's something that the average voter can do to start turning things around, right? So what we're going to do here in Orange County is show the rest of the state and the world that we have the political will to clean up our waters. And here's an ad that we're running right now. Go ahead, Dean.
Here in Orange County, the Right to Clean Water Charter Amendment would stop pollution at the source. Healthy waters mean healthy families and good-paying jobs.
Vote yes on Charter Question 1, the right to clean water.
Please vote yes on Charter Question 1.
Clean water is essential. Vote yes for clean water.
Vote yes on Charter Question number 1.
Vote yes on Charter Question 1 by November 3rd.
Paid political advertisement by the Right to Clean Water Political Committee.
So that's what we're talking about. And if you see that commercial on TV or if you see it on Facebook, this is what we're talking about doing. And we're so lucky to have Gabby and Sharon with us, as well as Joe and David, to talk about this. And I know it can be overwhelming, really, all of this at one time. But if we don't start talking about it, it'll never get solved, and we're putting forward something here. The citizens have put this forward. It went through the Charter Review Commission, and now the citizens get a chance to vote on it. Most of us will be receiving our ballots very soon. They were sent out September 30th. So if you don't have it yet, you're about to get it. Look at the very last page of your ballot, and you'll see the 3 charter questions. This is Charter Question 1, and we urge you to fill in the bubble that says yes or C, and let's get this thing passed and start cleaning up our waterways. So with that, I'd like to thank Gabby again. Thank you so much, and Sharon.
Thank you.
And David and Joe, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of The Right to Clean Water.